safe because we all have our days.
We do.
And from there,
where's a good place to find those people? Where have you found that safe zone, that tree of trust?
Yeah. Today we have a ton of people like that in our DevJam community, which is really cool. There's a group that Anna and Viv run here in Minneapolis that meets on the first Friday morning of the month at DevJam. I think that's a group of people. Like, I wish I would have had a community like that back when I was a product manager, and I often sit in with them and enjoy hearing their perspectives and sharing stories with them as well. And I'm sure, to all the listeners in their local communities, I would guess there's similar meetups and those types of things that you could be a part of.
Yeah, that's great. And so let's talk about continuing education because, as you mentioned, the MBA and then the past experiences you've had. But what are you doing constantly to stay up to speed on what's happening in the product world and things? What are things that Anne does to make sure that she's staying ahead of the game, as it were?
Yeah. I wish I was better at this, but I think the one opportunity that I have in my line of work is I get to go to a lot of different places every day. I'm at 3 or 4 different companies every day, and we're so blessed here in Minneapolis with the diversity of the industry and size of industry that we have here that, one day you're walking the halls at Thomson Reuters, and the next day you're walking the halls at General Mills, and the next day it might be, working with this cool startup like the Foundry, and so you get to see so much, and I see all these different people and organizations that are in different places, and there isn't one day that I don't go out to a client and I don't learn from them and learn from the people in the situations that they're facing there. So for me, that's how I accelerate learning. And over the years at DevJam, as I've kind of transitioned from being with a single client for a long period of time to being with many clients for shorter periods of time, it's just been a tremendous growth opportunity.
Yeah, well, and I've seen as people start adopting more and more Agile, I think Agile's been around for a long time, but it's these larger organizations now that are really starting to double down on that, right? And, I know we say it all the time on this show, but a lot of people think that it means cheaper and I get it yesterday, right? And it's hard for people to understand that you just have that many more opportunities to learn, and that's really what the goal is. But what other perspectives do you have on why these larger organizations, it's important for them to start looking to being more iterative?
Yeah, so I'm like almost afraid to say the word agile in public anymore because it's just one of these loaded words. And people hear agile and they either think, oh, here's a consultant coming in to take more of my money and do nothing, or they think process methodology. So I've been consciously, if I must say a word that starts with AGIL, saying agility. And because at the end of the day, whether your company is large or small, this environment is getting, I think it's scary. And if I was one of these big traditional companies and a CEO, I don't know if I could sleep at night because customer demands are more and more. Everyone expects whatever your software platform is, and it doesn't matter what your business is anymore. You are suddenly a software company, potentially an accidental software company, but people expect you to be able to flow changes into the market just like Facebook does, or just like some new app on the iPhone does. And these companies, they didn't grow up with some of the opportunities that newer companies like Facebook have. But anyway, to me, I believe that what agility really means, or why we want to work more iteratively, is the big ticket items are not efficiency and they're not making it cheaper. It's really about maneuverability and responsiveness, and then about a better return on investment. So you might say, hey, efficiency, better return on investment, same thing, right? No, absolutely not. Efficiency means we're just going to turn the crank faster, but we could potentially be building more of the wrong thing. The ROI, that's going to speak to what you said, Kurt, about we have these opportunities to pivot and shift. And by taking advantage of those opportunities to learn and actually being mature enough to say, yep, we were wrong, let's shift, we're going to end up building more of the right thing, less of the wrong thing. Therefore, you'll have a better return on investment.
Okay, so if I'm a business owner or I'm an executive, I'm listening to this, and I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. I have a budget and I have a timeline.
Yep.
And I've made promises, and I need to get this thing done. I'm using air quotes with the done. I need to get this thing done and out the door by this time and date. But the plan you're putting in front of me sounds like that we might not actually achieve that. How do you coach somebody who has that kind of perspective about, I need to get this thing done? Do you just tell them, okay, cool, you should maybe just do the waterfall then or something? Or how do you communicate the value of following a more iterative process when you have those constraints?
Yeah, so you're talking about the old triangle of terror. We've fixed time, budget, and scope. Ready, go.
Yeah, go.
And the thing is like in the traditional process or when we were doing that type of project management, what we had was perceived certainty. We certainly weren't certain of those things. We just kind of led ourselves to believe. And I don't know about your experience, man, but I can count on 0 fingers how many large project initiatives that I was a part of that hit time, budget, and scope. 0. Count them 0. But that being said, there's also a lot of, I'd say, fun in the industry around Agile and saying, oh, there's no dates in Agile, or you can't, don't worry about money.
Yeah, there's no hours, there's points now.
Yeah, there's no hours, there's no points. Get out of here with your budget talk. We don't have time for that. Nah, we don't get to do that. It's just like it always was. Pick 2. And I think Agile makes it a lot easier to pick date. More times than not, date is what we're really picking in the software industry. The budget piece, if we have consistent product teams, we're going to know what our burn rate is. So that becomes really, really predictable. And then it's the scope that becomes variable. What's different now than before is if we're working iteratively, part of that idea of that iteration is that we're going to build a whole thing that's actually done versus constructing software or technology like we build a house where we build the basement, then the middle floor, then we put the roof on. It's not done until it's done. In an iterative methodology, you will be building something, that small something will be done, then you build more, then you build more, then you build more. So when this date comes along, we're now giving you, that leader, the choice. We can say, Kurt, this is what we've built. It's releasable. I know this is your date. We were planning to build these 2 other things that were the lowest priority because we did work in priority order as well. We're not there yet. Would you like us to release now or would you like to wait? And I haven't met a leader yet that doesn't like to have the choice because back in that traditional day, we still hit that and we had that moment, but I couldn't give you that choice. The choice I gave you was we need to extend this date because the software doesn't work and it's not releasable.
Right. And I think there's been a change over the years that people didn't expect to happen with these larger businesses because, like you mentioned, you did a project and then you were done and the company got their product and then you walked away and everything was fine. But these days, most of these companies are having to build a software development capabilities now. Before, they could just do this one-off thing. We'll do a website, and then it's done. And in a year or 2, we'll refactor it, right? Mm-hmm. And then came CMSs, right? So I want to manage the content on my site. So we're going to build this thing, and now I can iterate on my site and its content for some time. But the project is kind of done now, and now there's just a publishing schedule. But nowadays, in this more agile environment, I need to build processes and a team and a methodology and a culture around doing this. When before, I just made basketballs.
Yeah, and I don't think it's much different than it was before, except for the cycle time. Because the market is demanding shorter and shorter cycle times. Before, we could get away with shelving something for a year. Things weren't changing that much around us.
Right.
So we could do that juggling of people. We were on these really long cycle times. Now we're being forced to shrink that down more and more and more. And I don't think that's going to stop. Right now, maybe in a lot of industries, it's acceptable to release monthly or quarterly. Holy crud, what's next? right? So it's all the same problems, but they're just becoming more and more transparent because we're demanding that we must reduce the cycle time. Very similar to how many of our problems that we always had became incredibly transparent when we first started working on 2-week iterations.
I think that transparency is what people are really valuing. I don't think people can understand it until they actually get into it sometimes. Like at first it sounds great because I've sat in those first demos and the client is like, well, what does it do? It's like, well, it's a login screen. And they're like, is this all? It's like, oh yeah, that's all it's done right now. Because that was part of our first sprint is to get that done. You can log in. There's nothing to log into, but
see, you had an opportunity that you missed there with your client.
Go ahead.
Yeah, don't start with login. We think that we have to start there because that's what comes first in the user's journey. But had we mapped the entire user's journey and looked at that map and thoughtfully said, hey, what do we want to learn about first? What do we want to validate first? It's probably not going to be the login experience because that's a pretty established paradigm in our industry. And your people had probably built similar login experiences hundreds of times. So there wasn't anything to really learn from the technology either in that space. But had you started to implement some of the core problem scenarios in that application and had that same conversation with your customer, they wouldn't have had to ask you what it does. You could have potentially done login last.
Does that change in your mind depending on what the actual vision is of the project? What you start on first?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to lay out that whole product story, hopefully in a visual manner, and then challenge people to kind of order journeys or threads through that story based on a number of different factors. One of those factors is going to be what's going to provide the most value. And value might be to the organization strategically, or it might be to the customer, or both, ideally. But I also want to look at things like, where do we need to unravel technical complexity? If there's something we just don't know how to do or we're nervous about the complexity of that, we want to bring that up in the cycle so that it doesn't bite us in the butt late. And then the other thing is like, okay, if there's something we really need to validate its value, will the market want this thing? Are we doing this in the right way? I want to bring that up too. So let's, people talk about fail fast. That's kind of loaded someplace, but let's say learn fast. Figure out, okay, does the whole shtick of this thing really play? Because let's figure that out when we spent a couple sprints worth of money versus a couple months worth of money.
You mentioned the customer in the business, but let's talk about also the value to the team. So what if the team is telling you that the login screen, just for an example, because we were talking about it, is a value to them to get that done first? How do you balance or coach a development team that might have different opinions on what the story is saying is success in the story?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have the development team and someone that can speak to the technology and the feasibility of what we're trying to do part of discovery sessions, part of that thing where we would lay out that big picture so that they have that context. I want them to understand the what and the why of what we're doing so that they can blend that then with the technology and the constraints that they experience in the code base. Then when faced with that type of situation, I'm going to ask a few more questions and I'm actually going to listen to what they have to say. Okay, tell me why. What are we facing? Maybe they want to do it because it's more efficient. Maybe they want to do it, well, we'll be in there. Maybe they want to do it because it's easy. Traditionally, as product managers, we haven't been really good about making the choice or answering the question of where should we start, because we were afraid when we were asked that question that we were being pressured to de-scope. So we would, kind of pound our foot on the floor and say, no, I'm not de-scoping right now. You got to be kidding. So then, because we chose not to make that choice, someone else down the line made it. And they didn't necessarily make it with the customer's best interest or the right information. Yeah. So typically developers will want to go to what is easiest or what is most fun. I know that was how I made the choice when I was a developer, or sometimes very left in the user journey, which is how we end up starting with login many, many times. I've seen some of the most robust login features created because there's time in the beginning of the release. But I would ask them, maybe there's a reason, but I might challenge. They're going to say, well, we can't do screen X, Y, and Z if we don't know who the user is and we can't apply our access control permissions or something. I might challenge, can we not mock that information?
Right.
Can we not hard code a couple users to start? Those types of things I would expect